and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, based off of our smash hit sensation, History of Car Safety.
Was it really a smash hit?
I think so. Everything we do, as my mom says.
It's gold.
It's gold, Jerry. We're taking a couple of items from that list and doing a little deeper dive on them. Anti-lock braking system.
And crumple zones.
See how we switched it up even though we're covering the opposite?
And what we did was, we're going to basically educate one another while we educate our audience about what these systems are, some history, how they work, that sort of stuff.
The level of education going on is off the
hook. It's bananas.
It's bananas.
I got yelled at the other day for using bananas too often.
For all my cats out there.
So I'm going to talk about ABS braking systems.
Let's hear it, Luke.
And how they work. So
lay some science on me.
So we talked in the history of automobile safety. So check that one out for like the time frames for whenever ABS brakes came around. But essentially, ABS brakes prevent your car from locking up the wheels. That's all I got. What else?
Right.
No,
Nailed it.
I'm joking. Okay. So, super basic, that's what they do. So it stands for anti-lock braking system, but you have to think about there's actually two parts to an anti-lock braking system. There's also an electronic braking distribution system. This is a little bit newer than ABS, and these things work in conjunction. So here's the science. So ABS braking is all about steering safety. Let that sink in for a minute, that braking is all about steering.
Oh, I don't understand how they relate.
Okay,
Please.
Well, here, I'm going to tell you. So, before anti-lock braking systems, if you would ever decelerate to the point where you locked up the wheels, so you hit the brakes, grabs the caliper, it happens all the time. In an emergency situation, you have to swerve, someone in front of you, whatever it is. What would happen is the brakes would lock, and instantaneously you lose all steering, because the way steering works, and now we have to talk about steering. So the way steering works is there's two types of velocity. You have translational velocity, that is the direction the wheel is traveling, and then you have rotational velocity of the wheel itself. And in ideal situations, those net out and equals zero. So whatever you're driving in this direction equals the exact same to the rotational, and it's perfect.
Until you slam those brakes and they lock up.
Or have you ever been in a situation where you've been like driving on like wet leaves and you turn the wheel?
Oh, I hate that.
And you're still going forward, or you're on ice.
Yeah.
So what happens at that point is you still have rotational velocity happening because the wheel's still rotating. So this can happen even if you're not hitting the brakes, but your translational velocity is lesser because you're not going in the direction that the wheel is traveling. You're going straight and the wheel is turned to the left or turned to the right. So what happens is when you lock those brakes, you have no rotational velocity when you lock them up. So that eliminates. So when you hit the brakes so hard before ABS, you have no rotational velocity. And if you don't have that netting out at zero, you lose the translational velocity stability, and that's what happens when you just hit your brakes. And ideally, you go in a straight line, but that very rarely happens, because the next thing that happens is you have different frictions that are happening with all four different tires. If they were on the exact same surface and it was all asphalt and you hit those brakes, you'd hit the brakes and you would just go straight. But that never happens. There's oil, there's leaves, there's water, there's different materials. And what happens is torque is created, and then the car goes into some sort of tailspin.
Been there before.
I know. We've all been there before.
I mean, maybe not all of us.
Most
but between
people
you
have.
and I, we all have.
Yeah. So that's what an ABS system does. So that or that's what it's preventing from happening. So how does ABS actually work? So what happens is you have inside of your vehicle, you have your master brake cylinder. So when you hit your brake in your car, the brake pedal, that engages the master brake cylinder. That master brake cylinder then initiates a hydraulic control module, and then that puts the brakes on in your car. And new ABS braking systems, what they do is they have a computer that actually senses wheel speed independently, all four wheels independently, and it makes sure that the rotational velocity and the velocity in the wow, I just lost my train of thought for a second. The rotational velocity and the trajectory velocity, so the straight line velocity. It makes sure that the translation velocity and that it doesn't get it back to zero perfectly because you feel it in the brake pedal. So it's locking, releasing, locking, releasing. And what it does in conjunction with the electronic braking distribution system is it makes sure that each one of those wheels independently has brake applied and released, brake apply and release. That way you're maintaining both translational velocity and rotational velocity, and it keeps the car from spinning. So that's essentially what it does. And when you really jam on the brakes and you feel that pulsating, that's that system doing its best to keep up with, the speed that you're at, and it actually works harder. And, early systems, it would be up to like 15 times a second it would actually brake. Now it's like hundreds of times per second it can actually brake and release, brake and release, brake and release an anti-lock
How many
braking
times? Like
system.
100 times a second?
Yeah.
Wow, that seems like a lot.
Yeah.
So, just to give you a little breather here, for any of you who don't think this is that big of a deal, on the drive over here today,
Did you have to employ ABS?
I had to employ my ABS because two deerses ran out in front of me going down a wet hill, and I slammed on the brakes, which is the proper thing to do when there's deer in front of you and people behind you. I slammed the brakes, and thanks to my anti-lock braking system, I was able to slow down and stop without losing control. And I was going down a giant hill, which I live on top of, which I would have flown over the edge of the hill and certainly died. So,
Certainly.
Without anti-lock braking systems, your favorite podcast host,
Second
who you
favorite.
like to listen to in the shower, Andrea, don't lie. Yeah, that's fact.
Wow.
Would have been dead. So thank you, anti-lock braking
So
system.
the interesting thing is a lot of people think that your anti-lock braking system only happens when you jam on the brakes.
No.
It's actually working the whole time,
But
modulating.
you can definitely feel it.
Yeah, when you come to that emergency braking situation, that's whenever you hear it, and that's also when you feel it. But even under normal braking conditions, because remember, that whole idea of you're on different surfaces and you have different friction coefficients on four different wheels, the only way you could stay straight in a braking situation is if, let's say you have ice on the left-hand side and you have, asphalt on the other side.
Ugh,
if you
that's
hit your
bad.
brakes, even if you're not locking, if you don't have ABS, you're going to spin out because it's going to brake them all the exact same. But with ABS, it senses the slipping and it lessens one or adds more or brakes more frequently on the other and keeps you going straight. So
Wow.
it's always working in a system. You just only really feel it when you're jamming.
Yeah, I hate that feeling.
Yeah.
I don't like that
So
at all.
some quick
Okay.
history. I
We
said
wanna
I
hear that
said I
history,
didn't
yeah.
have any, so I got a little bit of history. So 1929, ABS was first developed for aircraft by the French automobile and aircraft pioneer Gabriel Vision.
Oh, that was well done.
And it was actually, as a threshold for braking on airplanes, was nearly impossible. Like there was no
Oh.
way to, they just had to have super long runways.
That's interesting. Do you think that means that's an Airbus person?
Ooh, French, probably. Probably turned into Airbus or worked for
Yeah.
Airbus. In 1936, the German company Bosch, they make amazing dishwashers.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they're super quiet,
Oh, nice.
clean really well. They awarded a patent for an apparatus for preventing lock braking of wheels in motor vehicles. That same year, Bosch and Mercedes-Benz partnered up with an R&D project to build ABS. Wabco.
We've mentioned, for being not that huge, we've mentioned Wabco in so many episodes. It's
crazy.
unreal.
So 1972, Wabco partners up with Mercedes, and they put ABS brakes for trucks, for the first trucks that have ABS
That
brakes
was
on them.
probably a big help.
And these are big trucks. These are like semi
sure.
trucks, that sort of thing. 1978, the first production line ABS was put into BMW and Mercedes vehicles. 1988, 100,000 Bosch
1981.
ABS. 1981. What did I say?
88. That's cool.
Yeah, 1981. Over 100,000 Bosch ABS systems were installed.
Wow.
And then in 1985, the first ABS installation on U.S. vehicles. That's crazy that ABS wasn't installed on U.S. vehicles until 1985.
That is kind of crazy, isn't it? Granted, I was only 3 at the time, so that's okay. But yeah, that seems kind of late in the game considering
You think?
the other numbers you were just throwing out there.
So before we go on, I just have a slight segue if you remember any of this. We talked about car safety and ABS braking. So when you were a kid, did your parents make you wear seatbelts?
I don't know. I can't remember that far back, but I do know that we for sure rode in the back of pickup trucks. So I'm guessing the answer is no.
So I vividly remember we would be. Our cars all had lap belts. Most of them didn't have 3-point belts. They had lap belts. So I vividly
In the
remember.
back seat especially, they didn't have them for a long time.
And me, my brother, and my sister, when we would go places, I would lay in the window of the back car.
Oh no!
My brother
No,
would
you
lay. My
didn't.
brother would lay on the seat, and my sister would lay on the floor to go long distances. And then
You would lay in that like window nook?
yeah, well, like cars don't have that too much anymore
Yeah, I
nowadays.
know what you mean,
but
though.
now they have that like
Yeah.
behind the seat. So I would lay there, my brother would be on the seat, and then also
Oh my
I
gosh.
remember like I would stand in the front passenger seat, like in between my dad's legs, or sit on his lap while we were driving places. And he would sing oldies.
The first time I ever drove a car was when I was in, I think it was like first grade, and my uncle was home on leave from the military, and he was like, "Oh, you want to go driving?" And so my brother and I
Sure.
went, and I was too small to reach the pedals still, so he did the pedals while I drove, like did the wheel, and we're going down this road in St. Mary's, and the mailman sees me driving, and my uncle just waves at him, and we keep cruising down the road.
Yeah, I'm so like I wouldn't even consider like not strapping my kid in. Like,
Yeah, I know.
just,
Now it just seems so ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just
but,
culturally, it
yeah.
is what it is.
It's
right?
it's amazing how fast that change did happen,
Yeah.
though, and what a big deal it became. They did a good job on that. So we're running a little late here now.
Sorry.
So let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor.
I have to assume that it's, I don't know, Wabco, as much as we talk about them, maybe
It
Mercedes
should be
Benz.
if it wasn't. And them also. Maybe they teamed up to sponsor. Nobody sponsored us, Luke. Nobody sponsored us. If you want to sponsor us, reach out to us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. The last 3 people that reached out to it, I must have quoted them too high because they just straight up ignored me after that.
The third best
Maybe I'll
podcast in Pittsburgh.
I know. Keep that in
Thousands of
mind.
listens a week.
Thousands of listens a week. Third best podcast in Pittsburgh. Very handsome. So there's that. But we do have some shout outs, Luke. James S. from Northern Ireland.
I love our Irish
I
connections.
know. We have a great one. And he wrote in a long time ago. Sorry, James S. Suggesting an episode on measurement along the lines of like tolerancing and things like that. Also says we produce 5-star content. So James S. is good people in my book.
Cheers.
Steve W., the one who said I'm a patronizing snob. You remember him?
I love him.
You do love him. He clarified that because I wrote back and said, I'm sorry you don't like me. He said that he didn't say he doesn't like me. He was just giving some love to Luke. So he's okay in my book as well.
Aw,
He
thanks.
also asked what happened to Dave, and I was like, he basically bailed on us because he
Steve.
hates me.
He bailed
Yeah.
on you.
He bailed on me. Michael C. suggests an episode on hard drives. He is a data recovery engineer, which I've never heard of, so that's interesting, but had volunteered to do some of the research for us.
The way my computer's been behaving, I might need to give him a
You
call
might need
because
that.
I'm going to need some data recovered off of this thing.
You know what? I restarted my Lenovo. Here's a shout out for you, sort of. My Lenovo the other day, and it just sat on the startup screen. I had to
That's
yank the
so
battery out of it,
scary.
and then it started up again. So it currently doesn't have a battery. So anyways, if you don't have a computer with a battery, would like a shout out, would like to suggest an episode, would love some stickers, email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. Hop on the iTunes or
And
wherever
subscribe.
you listen. That's right, subscribe.
Star.
Reviews, 5 stars, 4 stars, 2 stars,
No
all those
whammies.
stars. Mostly just 5 stars would be great. We're getting pretty close to rich and famous, Luke.
We are.
Any day Wabco's going to reach out. All right, so moving on. Do you have any more ABS
That's
stuff?
it. I can't wait to hear about crumple zones.
Oh, man, crumple zones are rather interesting. Okay, so what is a crumple zone? You don't know.
I
You
don't
didn't
know.
research
I did
that.
not research it.
First, it also goes by crush zone, or crash zone.
I like crush zone.
I like them both better. They sound way more dangerous. So
Yeah.
crumple zone's probably just some good marketing that somebody did, right? So this is an area of the vehicle that's designed to deform and crumple in a collision.
What do you mean designed?
It's engineered that way.
Gotcha.
Were you just looking for that word?
I was.
I like it. So it absorbs some of the energy of an impact, preventing it from being transmitted to you, the passenger, sitting in what they call, quote, the safety cell.
Ooh.
So that's like the seats where people are sitting.
Okay.
That's the safety cell. So engineers have considered many factors in designing the safety of vehicles, including vehicle size and weight, frame stiffness, and the stresses that the car is going to be subjected to crashes. And of course, this, like all of these car safety things, if you haven't listened to that episode, go do so. They grow over time.
They get better.
Right. Well, hopefully they get better. At first, super rigid vehicles, no crumpling going on. Then somebody came up with this idea. It's like, okay, that's great, let's do it. But now it's going from just the front crumple to front and rear crumple zones to even side crumple zones.
They have them on the roof too, don't they?
Yeah, well, they do, yeah, for rollovers. Remember when that was all the rage with SUVs? Ugh, that was terrible. So mostly this all boils down to FT equals MV. So
I was just thinking FT equals NV.
Is that what you were
I was
thinking?
thinking it.
So the average force times change in time equals mass times change in velocity. So easy formula for you to work out, which really, again, I always talk about my senior project with the A pillar. That's really what it all comes down to, except it also then has to factor in cost. So your life really isn't worth that much to the auto industry. So sorry about that. So the front part of the car, in safety terms, the crumple zone is the area of the car before the A pillar, which is the pillar that runs up the front and up the windshield.
It's like right where your inspection sticker is.
Right where your inspection sticker is. Exactly, Luke.
Okay.
Man, you do know this stuff. You are a car guy.
I am a car guy.
Sort of. Remember when we were talking about lifting your truck?
Yeah.
That was your first episode. Was jacked
it
up
was.
trucks.
I've never done it. I
episode,
still haven't done
30.
it.
Yeah, you should do that. The front part of the car is actually designed to be weaker intentionally now and crumple up like an accordion. So fun fact, typically crumple zones are located in the front part of the vehicle for head-on collisions, but they can also be found on the rear, like I said. According to the British Motor Insurance Repair Research Center, the BMIRRC, they did a study on vehicle impact damage where it occurs. 65% were front impacts, 25% were rear impacts, 5 on the left and 5 on the right. So
Really? That surprises
it's
me
mostly
on the
going to be
sides.
front, but yeah, like you'd think more T-bone kind of
Yeah.
accidents are going on. But I wonder if you get like hit in the front side, if they still count that as a front accident. You know what I mean? Like if you hit on the driver's side,
the
but
offset ones,
right.
Yeah.
So little bit of numbers there. So a little bit of history. The crumple zone concept was invented and patented by the Australian-Hungarian Mercedes-Benz engineer Bela Baranyi.
Nailed it.
Thank you. Originally from 1937. That's so long ago. And then it was really starting to be implemented more in 1952. So in 1953, the Mercedes-Benz Pontoon, is that it? Ponton? Ponton?
Yeah.
Ponton? I don't know. Was a partially implemented version of his idea. And then in 1959, the Mercedes W111 was having a further implementation of it. In the early 80s, this technology was developed further for the aerospace and nuclear industries.
How so, James?
Well, let me tell you. So they were starting to do testing on these crumple zones. So, okay, automobiles, we understand how they work, but you kind of have to go do the testing, like you mentioned in the other episode where GM started smashing vehicles into barriers. Kind of expensive, kind of time consuming, and a lot of factors can go into changing that, right? But what if you had an easy way to do this at a low cost and relatively quickly over and over again with the perfect conditions each time. That's what was being developed by the aerospace and nuclear industries.
Okay.
German car makers started complex computer crash simulation studies using finite element methods, simulating crash behaviors of individual car parts, like different components, assemblies of them, quarter vehicles, and half vehicles.
Could you imagine the simulation, a crash simulation of a vehicle? Just knowing what you and I know about simulation and mesh and how long things take.
Let me tell you about that,
Oh, my
Luke.
goodness gracious.
So a conglomeration, I love that word, of 7 German car makers, Audi, BMW, Ford apparently, Mercedes-Benz, Opel, which was GM, Porsche. Is it Porsche or Porsche?
I say Porsche.
It's Porsche because we don't have one. And Volkswagen tested the applicability of 2 emerging commercial crash simulation codes. I don't know what they were, but I could guess. And they were then the simulations would only take 1 day to run. I don't know about you. That's crazy to me. I'm calling BS on that one.
I am too.
I used to run some pretty big, not nearly that complicated analyses that took way longer on computers that I have to assume were way bigger.
Oh, because I mean, you got multiple materials. You got
I was looking at some of the
deformation
setups.
happening.
Like they for sure had like a shell wall, like an infinitely thick
Yeah.
wall that they had set up, and so the stiffness on that was easy for it to contact. It was definitely a hand meshed model, which helps. Still, 1 day seems completely unrealistic.
Yeah, my biggest thing is just all the different material properties interacting with one another, and then this is definitely going to and you also have things that are going to be deformed to the point of destruction. So things are going to rip and tear. I just don't know how you accurately.
So to put this in context, let me give you a quick story. The first training that I went to for when I was teaching people how to do finite element analysis, this is when I was learning how to train people.
Okay.
And we went out with a guy from GM, and I won't put his name out there, but he was using our software. And after a long night out on the town with him, he had the guy that was teaching me to train and myself like kind of trapped in his car, and he busts out a model that he needed help with. This is like 3 a.m. And he couldn't get a single O-ring to compress properly and like run the full analysis to see that O-ring get compressed into its position and run. So you're telling me this guy at GM
Now,
in 2004, 2005 wasn't able to get an O-ring to compress, but we were smashing half models of cars into walls in 1 day's time?
Yeah.
I don't know. All right, so going to take a break on my explanation. I have a cool example coming up. But before we do that, let's take a break for Luke's rant.
Okay, so I'm keeping this related to cars. And I did this one before, but I wasn't really specific about this. I did a little bit of research. And this is the price of cars, James. I know I did this one before. And it's not just the price of cars.
Well, you did do this one.
But this is something new. So I just saw this morning. There is now a brand new car loan that is 84 months.
Who's offering that?
I'm not. I didn't see who. It's the new, like, all banks are thinking
Instead
about
of
doing
the
this.
60 month. What's
Or
84?
7.
That's 7 years.
That is crazy that you have a loan for a vehicle.
Does your car last that
for
long?
7 years?
I mean, mine does.
I mean, I could see a vehicle lasting that long, but the point is, if you're doing something over 7 years, like if you went out and you bought like the cheapest vehicle you could get, 7 years it's going to be like $80 a month or something like that. But that's not what they're doing. What's happening is these people are buying $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 SUVs and cars, and whenever they go in, they say, oh, your payment for 48 months or 36 months or 60 months is going to be $600 a month. They're like, oh, I'll pay for it for 3 more years. And it still takes their payment just down to like $300 a month. And I just, to me, and I'm not saying don't have a car payment, because I know it's really difficult, because there's a lot of financial advisors that say you never finance a car. Save money, buy a car cash. That's the best way to buy it.
What if it's 0% financing?
Again, it's
okay.
Yeah. So the whole point is, if you can't afford it, don't get it.
Don't buy it.
So,
That's a good rule.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that 100%, because you need a vehicle to get back and forth to work. But what I do think is, if you take a vehicle more than like the typical, 4 or 5 year loan. And I think 4 is really probably the window you want to be in, like 48 months. You probably shouldn't be driving that vehicle. You should probably pick a different vehicle that's a lot less that you can afford.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
What's your opinion, real quick, on leasing vehicles
It's like renting.
or like lease to own?
Yeah,
You don't know?
It's like renting.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
So
a
you don't
terrible
like it?
idea. Yeah,
Okay.
if it's what you do if you want more car and can't afford it.
Okay, fair enough. Or if you want a new car all the time.
Yeah. Do
I
you
can
like
see that.
leasing?
I've never leased a
Yeah,
vehicle.
I never
so
have
I don't
either.
know. Yeah.
Do you buy new or used?
New is all I've ever bought, but I wouldn't have a problem.
I'm on
buying
used now all day long.
Really?
My wife's car's been great.
I'm pushing for used for when my wife's car goes.
Yeah.
It's recently gotten a new muffler and something new for the transmission, so I think it might be sooner
about
rather
that
than
time.
later. Yeah. Okay, so moving on.
Moving on.
So I took a page out of Luke's book here, and I
Ooh.
watched a video, that gave a pretty solid example with some numbers to boot.
Okay.
Okay, so in less severe situations, like 20 kilometers per hour, so clearly they weren't using the right
Yeah, they're going about
units.
90.
900 miles per hour at least. So 20 kilometers per hour and lower. The bumper and the outer panels are really designed to ensure your protection at that point, and the crumple zone really doesn't play a huge impact. But in
That's
the
more
higher
cosmetic,
speed-
right? At that point, right?
Yeah, yeah. And also, they do design these things, the crumple zone, to be rather inexpensive to replace. I
Really?
mean, you're not going to think it's inexpensive when you're fixing it, but compared to what it could be, it could be a lot worse. So if you have a car moving 60 kilometers per hour, Luke, which is not the slowest, 60 kilometers per hour, still, that's not 60 miles per hour, which I'm traveling all the time.
Yeah.
And it smashes into something stationary head on, like a wall, or in my case, a telephone pole. True story. And it makes you stop in 0.1 seconds, which isn't completely unreasonable. Your squishy little brain is going to get jostled around and have 17 G's acting on it.
What?
So is 17 G's a lot? I don't know. Just floating around on our flat Earth that we're on right now, we're feeling 1 G of force. It doesn't feel that bad, right? But to put it in perspective, fighter pilots who train all the time to handle this kind of stuff only can handle up to 9 G's of force. So this is like
17
almost
Gs
double that
in a car
when you
accident.
smash into this and you stop at 0.1. So what's that mean? It's bad news for you and your tiny little brain. So now, if you drive into something slightly squishier, like a big foam block, like those jump houses that kids
yeah.
go to, maybe you're driving into that, and you, instead of stopping in 0.1 seconds, you take an entire 1 second to stop, which is still a pretty short amount of time.
1.
And you come to a complete stop. That means that your brain isn't going to suffer nearly as much because it's only going to have 1.7 G's
that's
force
like nothing.
acting on it. Yeah, I mean, you do that.
So
for
we should
breakfast.
always crash into children's bounce
So
houses.
you should crash into children and their bounce houses. Correct, Luke. So if you wreck, just make sure you drive into those. Yeah, you're welcome. But really, you can't just like drive into children all the time or their bounce houses or foam or anything like that. And you can't wrap your car in bubble wrap because that's not real effective. But what you can do is take advantage of what some brilliant, I assume, mechanical engineer came up with, and that's the crumple zone.
Has to be.
So an even smarter, what I assume mechanical engineer came up with, was the honeycomb crumple zone, which is used in like high performance race cars
I've
and things
seen
like
that.
that. So it really retains the stiffness of the material while reducing weight, so it can go super, super fast, and yet it'll still crumple when you're in one of those big old
when you need it
crashes.
to.
Yeah, so that's super cool technology. So also, it's a big push because of the lightweighting that's going on, because I guess there's some sort of goal or requirement to reach 54.4 miles per gallon by 2025 for like personal vehicles.
Yeah, so lighter vehicle, less gas,
And
right?
I think that number has to be the average across like your fleet of vehicles, but you have to keep lightweighting to improve that cost. So this is going to be stuff that's going into our crumple zones as well, is this honeycombed kind of materials. So why are they doing that? Well, or how are they doing that? They're changing materials, they're changing the shape of it, and one of the things that they're doing is using carbon fiber reinforced plastic, which is one of the big innovations. And if you haven't checked out episode 157 of Unprofessional Engineering, it is all about the production and how carbon fiber works.
I remember that one.
Yeah, you do?
I
That's
do.
good. It was only about 10 or 2020 ago, so that's pretty good. Let's see here. Not so fun fact for you to wrap things up. According to the federal government, rollovers have a much higher fatality rate than any other kind of crashes. Of the 9.1 million passenger car accidents in 2010, only 2.1% were rollovers, which is good, but they accounted for nearly 35% of the deaths. How is
you're
that?
Just getting squished.
Yeah, you're just done. You roll over, you're done, which is terrible.
How does that not, like, how do they not fix that? Is it really that much more expensive? I mean, you did the study.
I know.
You
I
did
think
the
that's
thing.
what it is. I think it's all cost.
And
they're saying it's such a low number of accidents. Like, of all the, 9.1 million accidents, only 2% were rollovers. So they're like, what? We can't invest there.
Yeah.
But all the deaths.
That's terrible.
It really is. I really thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's very
Crumple Zone's
interesting.
Super cool. There's a lot of good videos for people to check out on the YouTubes.
I like
including
seeing
ours.
it. I watched one where we actually saw like one without a crumple zone, a car, and then one with, and it's
the
amazing.
Old stuff that it was basically just like here's the body of your car. It's all steel, and it just smashes and like barely dents, and the person just goes flying.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Or whenever it does, like
it jams into
the
you.
steering wheel goes through your chest because it's so much that it just pushes everything through.
Ugh, that's terrible. Well, good thing there's great mechanical engineers out there making these inventions.
I feel safer.
Me too. Hopefully all of you feel safer after all of that as well and have learned something. Until next time.
Drive safe.